Well, hi, Tully. It's
Hey,
really good to
Nancy.
see you. This is Tully Moss, and this is the first time I've done one of these 5 questions, even though there probably will be more than 5 questions interviews. So we last saw each other at our 40th reunion in 2015, and I really enjoyed talking with you then. So I thought it'd be fun to follow up. So I guess the first question, in a nutshell, can you tell us what your career has been these last 50 years since, holy camole, not quite 50, but 40 something years since we left Williams?
Yeah, sure. I've had 3 phases to my career, Nancy, and it's been a process of evolution rather than intention and planning. The first part of it was right after business school, I went to Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, got an MBA there in 1979. And then I went to New York City for consulting. So phase one was management consulting. I did that for about 30 years.
Mhm.
And then an opportunity opened up in Asia primarily to teach. And so I went from consultant Tully to Professor Tully, as they called me. I was not a full professor with any university, but the Asians, with their characteristic respect for education, nonetheless called me Professor Tully.
Mhm.
And then there was a third phase or part of the evolution where I added to the consulting and the teaching. To that, I added executive coaching. And again, that's been almost exclusively in Asia. So that, in a nutshell, is what I've been doing professionally for the last few decades.
Because actually, I think you answered the question I had, which was what came first, your interest in leadership development or your interest in Asia, and how do these come together to give you a unique niche in the world of executive coaching?
Well, I should back up a little bit, Nancy, and say that Asia came first, actually. May not have sounded that way from the evolution that I just portrayed, but right out of Williams, I got what is called a Yale grant to teach at a Chinese college in Hong Kong. So I taught at Lingnan College, now Lingnan University in Hong Kong. I did that for 2 years and then came back for the MBA at Wharton. And at Wharton, I set up my own major in marketing strategy, and then at consulting firms in New York City, added to that the business unit strategy, mergers and acquisitions work, organizational effectiveness, a lot of competitor analysis also. So Asia actually came first, but I didn't think that was going to be a career. I thought that was an interesting thing to do after Williams, but the career was going to be business, be serious. But as I said, things evolved differently.
And what was it specifically about the Philippines that captured your attention and made you decide to live there?
Actually, the Philippines chose me rather than my choosing the Philippines, Nancy. I had a friend whom I'd known for several years when both of us worked in New York City. She worked at Citibank, and I was working for what is now Willis Towers Watson, a large consulting firm. And in 2002, she's a Filipina, but in 2002, her father passed away quite unexpectedly. So she went back to the Philippines to run the family business, which is the largest, or certainly one of the largest, human resources services firms in the Philippines. And she was aware of what I'd done as a consultant, seemed to think maybe I had a thing or two to say. And she engaged my services to help her figure out what she needed to do with the family business. So that got started in late 2002, early 2003. And at that time, I went to the Philippines for 2 weeks. This time, well, it's okay, 3 weeks the next time. I guess we're up to 4 weeks, and then it's 4 months, and then I just threw in the towel. And so I ended up living in the Philippines for about 8 years, And I would have to say, Nancy, had I chosen the Philippines rather than the Philippines choosing me, there are certainly things that I've come to appreciate about the Philippines, and in particular about the Filipino people. The Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands stretching sort of north to south in Southeast Asia. And so it has beautiful beaches. Got supposedly, I'm not a diver, but supposedly some of the finest diving spots in the world. But what I really appreciated were the people, and they have maybe the finest service mindset in the world. They may not always get things right, but more often than not, they are striving to please you, to have you be happy with their service. There's also an extraordinary dedication to the family there. It is amazing the sacrifices that they will make for the well-being of their families. There's a resiliency on the part of the people. The Philippines is one of the most disaster-prone countries on earth. It's in the Pacific Rim of Fire, so there are volcanic eruptions, there are earthquakes, and on average, there are about 20 typhoons, we would call them hurricanes, a year. So there's a lot of flooding, mudslides, high winds, a lot of property damage when those things really blow through, as they did just a month or two ago. So, and yet the Filipinos, with their beautiful smiles, they just keep right on. And so the tremendous resiliency on the part of the people. And then finally, what I came to appreciate was the women in the Philippines. There is an international accounting auditing firm, Grant Thornton, that has looked at, studied, analyzed the degree to which women have senior leadership positions in companies. And by their calculation, 40% of the senior leadership positions in the Philippines in business are held by women. Now that's as opposed to 23% in North America, at least in the Grant Thornton study that I saw. So that gives you some idea that something is going on there. Now, the CEO of the company that I worked for in the Philippines, a female, saw those Grant Thornton results and said, "Oh, I don't believe them. The business, it's just an old boys club here. So you go out and find the truth." So I did what we do as consultants, two things. I analyzed some data and I interviewed a bunch of people. And the data that I analyzed said, no, Grant Thornton is right. But the interviews offered some additional insights. Yes, it's true in aggregate that the female women, that the female Filipinos do hold a high percentage of leadership positions in business. But among the largest companies, the big conglomerates, it still is an old boys club. But in the interviews, and I interviewed 15 female Filipina executives, there were some interesting findings there. I came to have tremendous respect for them. They have a wonderful balance of humility, hard work, dedication to the people who work for their companies. These were, I thought, wonderful, wonderful women. And if I could highlight just one woman, not a woman I interviewed, I have met her, but I have not interviewed her, and that's Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Peace Prize a few weeks ago. And she's the first Filipino to win a Nobel Prize. And she went to Princeton. She was the lead investigative reporter for CNN for a couple of decades, and has won that Nobel Peace Prize for standing up for human rights and the truth. And she's taken a lot of hits for it also. She's been arrested several times. She still is, I think, under indictment by the government or various parties in the Philippines. But that might give you an indication of a kind of inner strength, dedication to doing what's right, that is exhibited by a lot of women in the Philippines. So again, Philippines didn't choose me. but I've come to appreciate several things about the country.
Wait, that's cool. Thank you. Now, one thing I know is that COVID caused you to leave the Philippines and resettle in the US, first in Massachusetts and now in Colorado. And it might be fun for you to give the little sort of the little saga of what happened to you, which is what happened to a lot of, you weren't exactly an expat, but what happened to a lot of people who were overseas during that strange time. And I'm also curious what it's been like to live in the States again, and whether you expect to stay stateside or move back to Asia.
Well, there are a lot of questions there, Nancy, but I'll start with the first one. What drew me back to the US? Then again, this is all part of evolution rather than intention. I had actually signed up and gone through a lengthy process to get a visa. I needed a retirement visa just to work there in the Philippines. But a requirement was that I leave for 3 weeks and leave the country for 3 consecutive weeks. And I started out mid-February of 2020. I went to Japan, and I was supposed to attend a partner conference there. Wasn't in Japan more than a day or two when they canceled that conference because of COVID. And I was in a beautiful city there in Kyoto, which I love, but the infection started to pick up in Japan. So I went to Seoul, South Korea. I wasn't there a day or two when word came that a Christian group of South Koreans had been in Wuhan, China, and the infections were starting to pick up in South Korea. And I started to look, I still needed to be out of the Philippines for 3 weeks. And I thought, well, what are my options? And I thought of various destinations in Asia, Singapore, Thailand, and so forth. I thought about Guam, which is a US territory in the Pacific. I thought about Hawaii, and finally I threw in the towel and said, I'll just go to Massachusetts. I'll stay with my sister for what I thought was going to be a couple of weeks. And I was in Massachusetts. I had a ticket to return to the Philippines mid-March. About 3 or 4 days before that, I was supposed to get on the plane. President Trump announced a suspension of flights between the US and Europe. I thought it's only a matter of time before flights are suspended in Asia. So it got extended and extended and extended. And the pandemic got a lot worse in the Philippines also. It initially was, the numbers were very small, but it really started, the numbers spiraled upwards pretty dramatically. So I thought, well, I'm at a stage of life here where I don't know when this thing is going to end. And so I'll just put a stake in the ground and stay here in the States. I grew up in Kansas City. And I will have to say this for our classmates, please, no more jokes about me Toto not being in Kansas anymore. But at any rate, our family vacationed every summer in Colorado. I have a great love of the mountains, feel right at home here in Colorado. So I decided to put my stake in the ground here. What's it like being back in the US? It's actually great. Easier to get around. I do have not great memories of it taking, I think it was close to 4 hours to go 6 miles one day in the Philippines because of the traffic. Manila traffic is notorious. I don't need that anymore. Easier to get things done here, and blue skies. A good deal of Asia is pretty polluted. A lot of air pollution. A fair amount of water pollution also. So nice to be back for all those reasons. There can still be things that I miss about the Philippines, but on balance, good to be here.
And you're still working as well, part-time?
I am. And part of I'm like the rest of the world, have been hanging on by the internet, but I have continued to teach people in Asia via Zoom or Microsoft Teams. I've continued to do executive coaching via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and it has surprised me. It's just about as effective as being there in person, which I never would have believed. but it's worked out very well for me.
Now I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit. We talked about this earlier, or going back to Williams. Did you have a favorite professor there? And if so, who was it? And what was it about that person that you know, really piqued your interest in whatever you've done since then?
There are actually three professors that I would highlight, Nancy, for having had more impact than others. And one would certainly be Peter Gruden. I took English 101, I think 102 from him, but he certainly inspired my interest in English literature and in the English language. And I went on to become an English major. So he got me started. So that's professor number one. Professor number two would be John Hyde in history. And I took history 101 from him, and he sparked an interest in history, but also alerted me to the challenges of really determining what the heck actually went on in a particular historical moment, and how there can be controversy and the difficulties of actually getting at the truth. And I have maintained a very keen interest in history. I've continued to read histories of various eras and biographies of various historical figures. So he too was something of an inspiration. And then I owe big thanks to number three, and that would be Peter Frost, also of the history department, because it was through him that I got that teaching position in Hong Kong. He had the connections with the individuals who were managing a fund that sent over 2 people every year to this Lingnan College in Hong Kong. So I was the recipient in 1970. It actually only 2 colleges, Williams and Yale, were the only 2 ones they picked people from. And I got it in 75, and I owe Peter Frost big thanks for that. Big thanks for that. So those would be my big 3. There are others, but I would give honorable mention to several others. Clay Hunt in English, Peter Barrick in English, Charles Thomas Samuels in English. So there were a number of them that were either kind to me or inspired me in one way or another. But the big 3 would be Peter Gruden, John Hyde, and Peter Frost.
Excellent. I've got one last question for you. And this is the times that we're going through now are quite unsettling, given the prolonged pandemic, political unrest in the country and others, and other countries, and the changing climate. Where do you find hope, solace, or inspiration in the face of uncertainty and disruption?
Well, probably from several different spaces or places, Nancy. And one, having lived abroad, there are typically a couple of things that can happen. One, you learn about the place where you lived, in my case, the Philippines and Hong Kong. And you come, hopefully, as you saw, you come to appreciate wonderful attributes of places like the Philippines. But at the same time, you come to appreciate your own country more. And that certainly is true of my perspective on the United States. It is shall we say, a contentious moment in the United States. I think there's more to this country, and there's more of us to be proud of, and there's more strength in the country than I think a lot of people realize. Now, does that give me solace? Well, it gives me hope, at any rate. And I think beyond that, do I get solace? I think there's a thinker named Ken Wilber who has said that the world kind of divides into, at least I've heard him quoted as saying this, I haven't actually read that he said it, that there are people who believe, no, there's nothing else out there. You know, once you die, that's it. And then there are others who say there's something else out there. Well, I'm in the something else out there category. And that definitely is a very much a focus of mine. And does it give me solace? Well, it definitely gives me a focus that's beyond the noise that's going on in the world right now, both in this country and geopolitically. So that's that. And I live in a beautiful place. And I just this afternoon came back from a walk in the Garden of the Gods, and it's just fantastically beautiful there. Colorado's fantastically beautiful. The sky here is this wonderful deep blue. I mean, how sad can sun shining? How sad can I be?
Well, and I'm glad you added that part about how much you love hiking and being outside, because as one who lived in Colorado for 30 years, yeah, it works its way into your heart. So, well, this has been terrific. Is there anything else you want to add?
We've covered an awful lot of territory.
It's great.
Nancy. I think for the time being, that's I think that's a good deal of ground to cover. But
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And best wishes to all classmates.